Hi guys! Today we're going to talk about paper and the different kinds of paper I use in my illustration process. So if you know everything there's to know about paper, see you next time. Otherwise, stick around. I want to help you shop for paper because remember the first time you went to an art store looking for paper and you saw like a whole wall of different things, and some things were $17 and some things were $3 and some things were $90, and you're like, yeah, I'm going to help you figure all that out. Obviously, this video is going to go over just a small section of the papers available out there, the things that I use for my rendering, flat sketching, project stuff. There's just so much out there. But, I don't like talking about stuff I don't know about. And I don't know about blueprint paper or the best graph paper or that kind of junk. So I'm not going to talk about those. Because, yeah. Just so we have some semblance of organization in this video, I'm going to go from thinnest to thickest. Or, I should say, lightest to heaviest. Because in the US, most papers are sold with a weight printed on the label. So this one, it has the size in inches, the number of sheets, and the weight in pounds. I went to school in London for a minute. When I first got there, they were like, buy this much A4 paper and buy this much A2 paper. And I was freaking out because I didn't know what A2 paper was. And yeah, that was so fun. Yeah, no. So I don't know about that stuff, but in the US, it comes in inches and pounds. That's how I look at it. It's like how big of the paper and how thick of the paper. Now, this video is not going to be about brand endorsement because I don't care about brands. I don't have any brand loyalty. I have product performance loyalty. So I use this brand of marker paper and this brand of tracing paper for whatever I need, and this brand of watercolor paper. And tracing paper comes in two forms. It can come in a roll like this or in pads like this. And most of the time I prefer the rolls because then I can cut them to whatever size that I want. Like I'll cut really long lengths for my elongation tutorials, and then I'll cut little pieces during crit to just kind of like overdraw little parts without wasting a whole sheet. If I'm buying it in pads, I've seen that there are two basic categories of quality. You have the kind that is a little bit rougher, a little bit toothier, and the texture is a little bit more heathered. It's uneven. You see that there are it's grainy looking. And then you have the kind that is like really smooth, really even in texture and in sheerness. And you'll see I slid this little template in here so you can see how sheer the tracing papers are. The smooth, really vellumy one, this one is from Canson. It's super, super sheer. And this one is a little bit less sheer, but obviously you don't have a huge problem looking through it. I actually prefer, personally, the grainier, toothier paper because I find the friction works better with pencil. And when something is this smooth and almost plasticky, I get no grip. And so my line quality suffers. And when I erase, the graphite tends to smear instead of coming off evenly like it does on paper that has a little bit more tooth. When I say the word tooth, I mean texture of the paper. Okay? It's like minimal tooth, rough tooth, like toothy paper is textured paper. Next up is marker paper. Now, marker paper is less sheer and a little bit thicker than tracing paper, although oddly enough, it's lighter. It's 18-pound paper, whereas tracing paper is typically 25-pound paper. And it's see-through so that when you're working with a croquis template, You don't need a light box. You can use the template directly on the marker paper. And again, the Canson brand is slicker, more like a vellum-y, smooth surface. And this brand, the Bienfeng, is slightly toothier. I mean, really, really slight, because marker paper just doesn't really have a texture. You kind of have to feel both to understand what I mean. And everyone has a preference. The number one thing you need to remember about marker paper is to figure out the correct side of the paper to use. And so when I first get a new brand, like I've used this brand so many times I don't need to do it for myself anymore, but whenever you get a new brand of paper, marker on one side and then fold it up and then marker on the other side, and you will see that there's a side that you prefer. Like I like the reverse of this paper. I think that it renders and blends more smoothly than the surface. And if you are familiar with some of my rendering techniques, you know that I like to draw on the wrong side and render on the right side to prevent pencil smearing. So that really works well for me. But yeah, no matter what brand you use, make sure that you are checking for the right side of your paper beforehand. And just put a little R in the corner if you're going to start tearing out sheets in your pad. Marker paper isn't really the most expensive in the spectrum of papers, mainly because so little material goes into it. But when I'm working with when I'm doing brainstorming where I'm busting out like 30 croquis a night or whatever, I don't want to use nice paper because it's not really about how beautiful the end product is, but just getting ideas down. And so I will just use copy paper, ditto paper. I've been calling it ditto paper for years. And lately, when I talk to my students, they're like, what's ditto paper? They don't know what that means. Like ditto paper, copy paper, Xerox paper. It's like 20 pounds. You can get, in giant reams at office supply stores. And they are sheer enough where you can see the template. Sometimes you'll need to take your template to the copier, blow up the density, or scan it in and pump up the contrast in Photoshop so that you can really see it under this ditto paper. But that's what I normally do. Is like when I'm busting out a million croquis, I just want to work really fast. And yeah, the marker work on this paper isn't going to be beautiful, but it's nice because it's such a lightweight paper that it's not going to soak up too much of your marker ink. Like I've seen people who do marker work on stiffer papers like Bristol paper, and I don't understand that because it just soaks up so much of your marker ink that your markers will dry up like that. I've recently been introduced to this category of rendering papers for marker work where it's not sheer, it's not see-through. Now, the benefit of this kind of paper is that the markers won't bleed through. When you're working with such light, 18-pound, 20-pound papers like the copy paper or the marker paper, there is chance of bleed through. That's why I always work with like a scrap sheet underneath. But this is marker paper that won't suck up too much of your ink. It's not see-through, and so it's durable enough for rougher handling. Like the marker paper, it's super flimsy. One of the complaints people have about marker paper is it's so flimsy, it wrinkles easily. You have to be really careful about it. For me, I just use cheap Bristol or really lightweight illustration board to back my finished marker paper renderings and call it a day. But some people don't like to bother with that, and so they like the thicker rendering paper. And there are a lot of brands who make them. I can't make a big ringing endorsement. My number one peeve about this kind of paper is it's got this gray pallor. This is regular ditto paper. This is the inside cover of this marker paper pad. And this is the paper. It's got a grayness to it that I don't like. I don't want it to fight my stuff. If you don't like marker paper being that flimsy, and you don't like how much ink the Bristol paper soaks up, maybe this is a good option for you. Let me know. Like maybe you really, really love it and you're like, Zoe, you're full of crap. This is the best paper ever. And you need to recognize its beauty and wonder and majesty. And this is what I do with it. And here are some awesome things I did with it. Just let me know. Just drop me a comment. It's cool. This is normal, just sketching paper. And certain brands like Strathmore, they will put a picture on the cover of what the paper is best used for. And so this paper is best used for dry media like pencil, and so they have a pencil drawing on the cover. This is watercolor paper, and it's best used for watercolor, and so they have a picture of a watercolor painting on their paper. It's got a fine tooth surface, which means it's not very textured at all, but you can still see that it's much more textured than vellum or the marker paper. This paper is about 50 pounds, and it's just sketching paper. You know, it's inexpensive. It's see-through enough that you can see the croquis template if you need to, but it's not great for marker use. If you are the kind of illustrator that does a lot of really intricate pencil work like this, then yeah, go ahead and invest in nice paper for pencil work. But I don't do a whole lot of that, and so I don't buy the nice stuff. I buy this inexpensive stuff. Now, I'm not saying Strathmore as a brand itself is inexpensive. It's not. They have price tiers, and they mark them by the color of their covers. So when they have most of their papers in the yellow cover, and that means it's their budget student pricing. And then they have one up from that is their brown cover, and they have drawing, sketch, watercolor paper, like all those in the brown cover. And that is their slightly more expensive, slightly more higher quality series. So your 300 series and your 400 series. And then they have the white cover, which is their most expensive, highest quality papers. They have the green cover, which means that's their eco-friendly recycled paper line, you know, stuff like that. This is Bristol. Bristol is good for dry medium. It has a vellum surface. What that means is it has a really smooth, very like not toothy at all surface. That's what there's vellum paper, which is that super plasticky sheer stuff, and there's vellum surface, vellum used as a describer, which means that the surface of the paper is super smooth. I use Bristol for dry media like pencil, sometimes charcoal. I use it mostly as illustration board for backing. So this is just a little swatch card that Strathmore gave me once on Bristol's. And so we have smooth surface, which is smooth, vellum surface, also smooth, and then we have plate surface, which is like the smoothest. So if you're looking for just everything that's gonna glide on it, just like wax right off, because it's so smooth, you're looking for plate surface. Let's talk about watercolor paper. So there are 3 categories of watercolor paper in terms of texture and 3 categories of watercolor paper in terms of weight. So weight, again, like our marker paper was 18 pound, our tracing paper was 25 pound. Watercolor paper comes in 3 basic weight categories. The first one being about 80, 90 pounds, the second being 140 pounds, and the last being 300 pounds. This is 80-pound paper, and it's really stiff. You guys can see that it's pretty stiff. You're not going to see anything through that paper, so you're going to need a light box if you're using a template, but it's still pretty flimsy. You know, it'll whip around in the wind. This is 90-pound paper, and this is 80-pound paper. You know, they're pretty similar in terms of firmness and how much they're going to flap in the breeze. 140 pound, this is 140-pound paper, much stiffer. I'm going to say that it's about the basic firmness of a business card, your average business card. And then you have 300-pound paper. And yeah, it's basically board. like illustration board. It's really stiff. It is not going anywhere. Now, 99.9% of the time I do renderings, I will use 140 pound paper. Now, the other 0.1% of the time, when I paint white, I like to use a tonal paper background and use an opaque wash on top. And so that's when I'll use about 90 pound Canson paper. And if you want to know more about that, I have a whole video on how to handle illustrating white fabrics. I'll drop a link in the comments. But the rest of the time, I use 140 pound paper. The thickness of the paper should respond to how much water you're going to put on the paper. And so you can do a lot of opaque stuff on thinner paper, like 80 pound paper, because the opaque wash doesn't hold a lot of water. If you're going to add water to the whole thing, like if you're working on landscapes, you know, when you're like taking a hike around the lake and there's like that old dude, he's got an easel set up and he's painting a watercolor landscape of the lake, and he's like totally happy with life and like zoning out and like painting happy trees, like a watercolor version of Bob Ross. He's probably using the 300 pound paper because he had to soak the whole paper in water before he started applying color. And when you are using that much water, you do need the thicker papers. For us, for fashion illustrators, we don't need that much. We just need enough to soak up for like ball gowns and wet on wet technique and things like that. Now, as you can see, there are a lot of different textures and kind of shades of white. We have our cool whites, we have our creamier, eggshelly whites. And you know, I have a problem with that word eggshell because when I look at my eggshells, they are white. They're like white like this and not white like this. I don't think I've ever cracked an egg that was this color. And so I find that annoying, and it's a word I don't like because it's not very accurate. I like accuracy. People, get on that. Stop naming shit eggshell. So those are the 3 weight categories, 80, 140, and 300. And then the 3 texture categories are hot press, cold press. What am I talking? What's wrong with my fingers today? Hot press, cold press, and rough. Those are the basic categories. And there's a bunch of other stuff that are specific to different brands, but basically hot press and cold press refers to how they're produced. But in general, hot press means your paper is really smooth, like vellum, plate, smooth, not much tooth, and they're really good for renderings where you're going to do a lot of tiny detail work, like if your design project features a lot of embroidery or a lot of lace, like really intricate things, or if you want things to look really smooth, like you have a lot of shiny fabrics. You don't want a bumpy texture to fight your highlights and shine. You want that smooth paper to emphasize the sleek smoothness of shiny fabrics. And yeah, that is how I choose my paper, because I have worked a lot with hot press and a lot with cold press deliberately so that I can choose paper according to the project. And that is what I choose it on, based on what I'm going to be rendering a lot of, what is going to be more important to emphasize. Cold press paper tends to be on the more textured side, and so I like to use it for more textured renderings like cut and sew knits, alligator skin. I'm drawing a blank, although seriously, I use it all the time. Oh, denim is great, suede is great, all those things. Rough paper is rough paper. It's super rough. It's like rougher than cold press. This is rough paper. Here's an example of rough paper, and you see just how textured that is. Here's cold press, and here's rough paper. You can see the distinct how this is very toothy, but this is even toothier. And I use watercolor papers for all different kinds of watercolors: inks, gouache, watercolor pencil, watercolors. I don't really use watercolors, like actual watercolors, very often. I'm more of a gouache and ink person, and over the last couple years have really fallen in love with watercolor pencils. But all those things work on watercolor paper. Now, watercolor papers, they come in singles. And if you are new to watercolor paper, I would recommend you hit the art store and buy like a small sheet of a couple of different kinds. Then you can get a handle on, what texture you like, what weight you like, what works for the kind of renderings that you do, all those things. And then you can decide on a couple that you like and go buy a full pad of them. When you buy the full pad of them, there are a few different packaging things that you need to be aware of. Some of them will come in the spiral bound. Self-explanatory, right? It's spirals. You open it up and you rip them out. Whatever. Some of them have the little perforated edge so that you can get a clean rip off, but not everyone does that. Some brands, they just have the regular, glue on the top, everything is free, and you just peel them up, has a really clean, smooth edge on the top, it's fine. Some other brands, they will glue all the edges all the way around, and they call them block, like a block of watercolor paper. And you're like, why would you do that? You need the individual sheets. Like, how annoying is it to sit there with an X-Acto knife and peel each one up individually? Yeah, it's super annoying. I bought this on accident, and that was really annoying and kind of stupid of me, but I was in a hurry. Don't make the mistakes that I made. The reason why some watercolor paper comes in these glued together blocks is adding water to watercolor paper will ripple your paper. And if you add a lot of water, the chances are for the water to absorb and dry in different patches and start buckling and rippling, depending on really how much, how aggressively you're adding water to your paper and how fast things are drying and how many layers of paint you got on it. And when you're doing landscapes, when you're adding a lot of water, or when you're not using a template, these blocks are great, because the glue holds down the edges, and so the edges aren't like rippling and warping. You're going to keep your clean rectangle shape, and it's going to keep the fibers of the paper flatter, so you get a smooth, clean, finished watercolor. And when you're done and everything is nice and dry, you can peel it up off the rest of the block using an X-Acto blade. For me personally, I don't use watercolor paper like that. I just take the sheet, I use a template on a light box, and I use the croquis template to draw my design, etc., etc. So I have no need for the glued edges. It's just annoying for me, and I sat there for 20 minutes with an X-Acto, carefully prying all the layers out without damaging the paper, because this stuff is expensive. Arches, I love you. You are so pricey. I know, you get what you pay for. So yeah, when you're buying watercolor paper, just think, okay, what texture do I want? Because what am I rendering? Am I rendering a lot of really intricate, tiny details like individual feathers? Maybe you're really into hat design and you're doing all these fascinators with like beads and feathers, and you want all those little details. You probably want a smoother surface. Hot press will probably be more up your alley. Think about the weight. Like, I'm going to do everything with opaque gouache. It does not need to soak up paper. I'm going to do a lot of gouache and color pencil work on top. So maybe you don't need the really stiff 300, 140 pound paper. Maybe you can make do with 90 pound paper. Then the format. Do you just need one sheet? Because usually you use cold press paper and you're just going to use hot press paper for the one thing. Then just go get a sheet. Paper is expensive, y'all. This is why I'm making the video, so that you don't make a lot of expensive mistakes buying paper. So that's it on paper, guys. Those are all the papers that I use on a regular or semi-regular basis in my design and illustration work. And if you have a question, drop me a comment. I love all the questions. Check out my info box. It's got all my social media links and, notes and different links to different things. In the following weeks, I'm going to start with specific texture rendering videos. I'm going to wrap up my hair series and my male figure drawing series. Good stuff. I get bored easily. I can't just do one series and just keep going for weeks on end. And so I'm assuming you get bored easily too. I just assume everyone gets as bored as easily as I do. Anyway, that about wraps things up. Hit the subscribe button if you want to stay tuned for future episodes. episodes. I'm not a TV show. Hit the subscribe button if you want to be alerted to future videos. And I will see you next time.